Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Insolvent IP webinar, The World of Domain Names and Realising Their Value in Insolvency. So today's webinar is the first in our current series of sector-specific and IP asset-specific webinars. Our previous webinar was covering IP assets in insolvency on data, and we're pleased to have you here with us today. So, who's experiencing some technical problem at the moment. Hopefully we'll just get that sorted just now. But today what we have me, that's Morven Fraser. I'm the manager of corporate recovery and restructuring IP asset sales, and we've got Ruby Chan, our IP analyst in brokerage, and we have our guest speaker, Tommy Butler, who is the owner of Glasgow.com and an experienced domain professional. So, who are Metis Partners? We are a commercial intellectual property consultancy firm that specialises in the assessment, exploitation, valuation, monetisation and sale of intellectual property assets. We are headquartered in Glasgow and we're market leaders in the UK. We work mostly in the UK with North American, European and Asian experience, and we sell IP assets globally, as I'm sure most of you know. Our corporate recovery and restructuring team provides commercial, practical advice on how to deal with intellectual property in insolvency or distress scenarios, but we're not lawyers. We take a commercial approach and we try to provide commercial solutions to IP issues in insolvency. So today, what are we doing today? Today is the value of domain names in insolvency. What are domain names for a start? And then we'll do a short poll to make sure you're all awake. And then we're going to talk about monetising domain names. And then we're going to talk a little bit more with Tommy. We're going to do a Q&A to figure out his thoughts and impressions of domain names, both insolvent sales and insolvent sales. We're going to talk a little bit about the commercial value of domain names in insolvency. Finally, we'll talk on the 5 key takeaways, what to do in your next case. And now I'm going to hand over to Ruby to go through a few of the basics.
Thank you, Morven. So first off, to cover up the basics, what are domain names? So a domain name is part of a larger system, very often called DNS, which stands for the domain name system, which gives addresses to web servers and web pages. So take this for an analogy. Imagine if we don't have any postal addresses, then we might have to use coordinates to tell someone where our offices are located. Now, domain name is similar to addresses. It hides the technical IP address that not all of us could easily figure it out and make it really easy to identify and remember. A domain name is usually separated into 2 parts. So take Metis Partners domain name, for example, metispartners.com. .com is the suffix, which is also called the top-level domain, and other examples of top-level domains could be .co.uk, .net, and .org. Some examples of the newer ones that you may or may not have come across are .guru, .tips, .technology. In this case, Metis Partners is the mid-level domain, which is usually really easily identifiable, either with a brand name or the name of a business. Now, it might be useful to note that when you register a domain name, you own the rights to use the domain name rather than owning the domain name outright. Having said that, domain names are like finite commodities, just like real estate, so any could have value, but not all are worth millions. So what makes domain name valuable? For our poll today, just make sure that you're awake. Which of the following domain names do you think sold for the most? We are just pulling that up in a second. Okay, so which one of these domain names do you think sold for the most? Come on, get involved.
Oh, we can see lots of you are voting now.
Okay.
We'll give you a minute to sort this out. So, definite favourites here. Oh, one of them's only got 3%. Oh, he's gone up a bit. Okay. We'll give you another 15 seconds just to give you some time. Maybe not 15 seconds, that might have been stretching it slightly. Let's go for now. Okay,
So to review, WE.com sold for $8 million in 2015. Second place is websites.com, which sold for $975,000 in 2005. Coming in third place is bestoftherweb.com, which sold for $45,000 in 2006. Last but not least, websiteforsale.com sold for a whopping $600 earlier this year. So those of you who are better than me at numbers could probably work out the differences. But just to give you an example, WE.com sold for around 13,000 times more than websiteforsale.com. So what makes a domain name more valuable than the other ones, and how does this apply to the insolvency context? So like any other type of intellectual property assets, domain names are likely to be associated with revenues. A common way to monetize domain names is through domain name parking, where the domain name is linked to a web page containing adverts, listings, and links. Revenue is generated based on the number of clicks made by visitors. Now, there are a number of ways to determine whether a domain name is of value. One of the first questions to ask is, what's the top level domain? Is it a .com or is it a .uk? As .com is the most common top-level domain, .com domain names are usually more valuable than its equivalents in other top-level domains. Secondly, is the domain name generic? So if it's a general description of a sector, say finance or real estate, or if it's a short domain name, say between 1 to 4 letters, these are some indications of potential blockbuster domain name that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the other hand, if it's a longer domain name with a less common top-level domain, for example, how to spoil my wife.tips or golffanforever.co.uk, then these might have to be looked at by a professional to determine whether these are of particular value on their own. Now, in your insolvency case, as mentioned before, domain names is a finite commodity, so their value might not be affected by a distressed company. But having said that, the web traffic and the brand associated with the domain names could be affected by insolvency, and this may in turn affect the value of the domain names. As each domain name and the context of where it sits are different, an initial look by the appropriate professionals can perhaps guide you into the right direction. So I will pass on to Morven to introduce our guest speaker of the day. Morven?
Thanks, Ruby. So, as I mentioned before, we have Tommy Butler here as our guest speaker. We're delighted to welcome him to our webinar. Tommy is a domain name professional or domainer, and I'm sure he can give you a much better rundown of his professional experience than I ever could. Tommy.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Yeah, I've been buying and selling internet addresses of domains for the last 20 years. Some of them have been very interesting names, and I basically classify myself as a full-time domainer, which, on my LinkedIn profile, that's what it says. I'm a domainer, and that raises questions. What is a domainer? And in today's world, a domainer is a person that buys and sells and develops internet addresses. And that's just a sort of basic of what we actually do. We look out for generic keywords, service keywords, and try and buy those domains and then turn them into a business.
Great, thanks very much, Tommy. So, to move on to our Q&A session, we understand that you own around 1,600 domain names.
Yeah.
What are some of the more interesting ones, and how did you come to acquire those?
Some of the interesting ones is like corporate jet hire, which sounds really, really luxurious. And I bought that as a drop when the financial crash happened like 10 years ago. A lot of jet names sort of went under, and I picked it up for $60. Now that is a fantastic name, to have with regards to that sort of industry. SantaClaus.org.uk is another very nice name at Christmas. And I just like geographical names and product names and typical business names. Those are the sort of names that I really do get a buzz from trying to buy, and also geographics. I love when I can buy a geographic name.
All right, okay. How come you're so interested in acquiring these geo names?
Well, geo names, if you look at a map, if the city, it says the city name or the town name, that's basically what you're buying online is the city map or the town map name. And if you own that, it's already a brand because you've got a population there. If it's a population of 70,000, 50,000, 500,000, 800,000 or 2, 3, 5 million, you already have a captive audience. And that's what I love about geographics, because if people are born in a city, they have a love for that city, and therefore you've got a captive audience, and that's why I love geo names.
Okay. And what are some of the indicators that you look at before acquisition of a domain name?
I look at the population. I look at the linkage if I'm looking for a service name. I look at the history. There's programs that you can run, and it gives you if the name's been owned by someone else in the past, and you can go back and do an analysis on the back end of it. So we're doing all those things and then ticking the boxes. It's got to fall into that criteria, and that's how I sort of do my domain name. And I also like to go and visit the places. That's my new one, is I go to the places and then I buy up the names.
Oh, nice. So you must get some good holidays out of it then.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. After you buy the domain name, how do you go about monetizing it?
Well, I'm actually what you call a mass geo developer. I basically build my names into websites. But there's several things you can do. You can part names, which is everyone's probably came across a part name, and quite a lot of domainers use this option, whereupon you go to the website, you see a page, you click the link, and that domainer has earned money from it. Affiliate marketing is another one where the likes of Debenhams and all that run affiliate programs. Thompson's and Thomas Cook and all that all run affiliate programs. All the hotels run affiliate programs. So you go to the site, you click on the link, you get paid anything between 8%, 5%, 10% commission.
Okay. Now, Sedo and GoDaddy are two of the domain name service providers that come to our mind when we think of service provision. How are domain names sold on those platforms?
Well, Sedo is one of the biggest. It's been on one of the very first, probably one of the very first businesses that started up selling domain names, because they realised a way back then. And Sedo also run a parking company, so they started off as the parking company and then discovered that there was a market there was this market where domainers and other people were buying and selling internet addresses, and they built the platform basically to allow other domainers and people to get and start bidding for domains, and it became very, very successful. GoDaddy, the world's biggest register, if you look at it, they have, with so many names in their portfolio, they had discovered that, hold on a minute, $10 to renew a domain or buy a domain, and someone's dropped it. That domain name's worth maybe 2,000, 3,000. So they now start putting the names to auction. And if you look at GoDaddy now, GoDaddy have been buying up some of the major domain portfolios in the last 2 years, which is a very interesting scope that they've started to move into that sort of field. So it's quite interesting.
It is indeed. And as we come to the topical question of the year, in your view, does Brexit have any implication at all on the domain name market?
Yeah, I think it really, really does, because you've got to raise the question with, the .co.uk. And although it's still going to be called the .co.uk, with regards to Brexit, to me makes the .com names more valuable, because it's a global audience. With regards to the .uk, if you look at the connotations of what can happen or what might happen, just say Brexit happens and then Scotland goes its own way, then what happens to the .uk? Because the .uk then technically and legally doesn't exist as an from that point of view. But I spoke to Nominet. Nominet said that the .co.uk will still run. But to me, it raises that question: if there's no such entity as the United Kingdom, then really, where does that put that sort of extension? And obviously, Nominet's one of the better organisations with regards to running a TLD and doing a fantastic job. But I think the .com to me is always king.
Okay. Okay. Now, to move on to what are the potential dangers of domain names in insolvency? So I think firstly, one of the key questions in this is, and certainly if you have any questions for Tommy, do put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end, but would the value of a domain name be affected if it's being sold by an insolvency practitioner?
It wouldn't. It would actually increase in some aspects with regards to if it's a really, really good quality name, because the names don't go down, certain names just do not go down in value. Because they are so scarce, it would actually probably increase the value if the insolvency practitioner knew exactly what they were dealing with, and if they had it out to the right audience, it could increase the value of what they're actually sitting with, because especially if it's a two-letter, good quality three-letter name or a generic product name. Like the example is, if you look at shoes.com, which has happened in the last week, shoes.com got bought by Walmart, the intellectual property, and that went for $9 million. And now, if you go back 20 years and go, how much for that name? And that's such a short period of time. So that's the beauty with it. If insolvency practitioners get the right advice and the right help, it can make a big, big difference.
Yeah. And as most businesses have websites nowadays, domain names are often involved in insolvency cases. Are there any ongoing liabilities or costs that insolvency professionals should look out for?
They should look at the age of, they should check the small print in the invoices when the domain names were registered. Because it was registered for, let's say, $10 or £10 like 10 years ago, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only value of it now. You know, that's a long time in this industry, so that £10 name could be worth 2,000, 20,000, you know. So therefore, it's always to get that advice and say, what is a domain name? You know, I've never came across this. What value does this go at? So they're always better picking up the phone and asking someone who knows a wee bit about it, to just come and say, can you help me out? You know, a problem here. I don't understand this because it's a virtual business. Give me some advice on it, and I think that is absolutely crucial in this day and age.
That's something that we would certainly echo. Now, if a domain name registration has lapsed, can you get it back?
Most registers have a sort of clause where they maybe give you up to 60 days after. But if you think of the process, 90 days, 60 days, you get the emails coming in and everything else, you normally have a 60 days notice after that. And what they normally do is after normally up to the 60 days, they'll probably charge you £100 or $100 to try to get it back. If you don't do it then, it then goes to auction. And then that's when people like myself and other folk put in bids for that name, and we hope that no one has noticed it, and hopefully we can pick it up at a fraction of the cost.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that was useful. Ruby, I'd like to hand over to you now.
Great. Thanks very much, Tommy and Marvin. So coming to talking about the commercial value of domain names in insolvency. So top 3 things to bear in mind in your next insolvency case. So when thinking about selling domain names, it's quite important to know who's got access to the domain name registry. Is it a director of the company, or is it a team member within the IT department? It's crucial to obtain access to these and ensure that the passwords are changed and protected in order to secure and preserve the domain names in an insolvency scenario. If not, access to the domain name could be quite difficult, and registration might lapse due to unpaid fees, which would then decrease the overall value of the domain name or the IP asset package. So lastly, where possible, speak to the appropriate professionals to evaluate whether the domain name holds specific value in its own rights and how best to proceed. Some of the things that we have done for our clients is to perhaps register new related domain names to increase the overall attraction of the IP asset package, or even hold these for the clients to avoid registration lapsing in an insolvency case. Lastly, here are our 5 takeaways that we are just pulling up. Great. First of all, as I mentioned, secure access to all domain names held by the distressed company in your case. Secondly, gather as much practical information as possible. And what do we mean by that is figure out who has got access to these domain names, have the fees been paid, have the passwords to the domain name registry been changed, and does the company actually got access to the domain names. Thirdly, evaluate whether there are blockbuster domain names or ones of particular value. Fourth, beware of the potential pitfalls that we've discussed in this webinar so far, and make sure that if you've got any questions or when you're in doubt, give us a call and we'll be very happy to give you a hand. And our last key takeaway, some of you might have seen it before or have got it in your files. Now, this is our IP asset checklist, and we decided specifically for insolvency practitioners. And we will send you a link to this follow this webinar, which might help you in your next case. So thanks very much for tuning in and listening to what we've got to say about domain names. We hope that this was helpful. Please see the screen for our next webinars. And do you have any questions just now?
So we do have one question at the moment. Are there typically termination clauses triggered by insolvency in the agreements for the rights to use certain domain names?
I would imagine that that's up to do with the insolvency practitioners themselves, but it's just basically the domain name will lapse if the renewal fee hasn't been paid.
Yeah.
And a lot of insolvency practitioners don't understand that if they don't pay the renewal fee, then the name will drop and lapse, and that has happened, I think, a few times. I've seen that happen.
I think in our experience, we haven't seen licenses with domain names that have triggers for insolvency. Yeah. The only trigger is non-payment of the fee. So whilst other assets do have clauses that can claw back a post an insolvent event, that doesn't seem to be the case for domain names. You still have them. It's just a different thing to sell.
Yes.
I think that's all the questions that we have. So thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Tommy. And if you've got any questions that you think of later, please do get in touch with us. Thanks, and we hope to see you at another webinar